We continue today in our series focusing on Hebrew Bible texts alongside children's books. Last week we finished up Genesis with the Joseph story, a tale of betrayal and loyalty, ultimately resulting in Joseph, an Israelite, saving the Egyptian people from starvation and famine. Fast forward to Exodus, where we pick up today, and the Egyptians and the Israelites no longer have such a congenial relationship. The Egyptians have enslaved the Israelites, and Pharaoh, the leader of the Egyptians, is crafting a plan. See, Pharaoh needs the Israelites to survive, but he feels terribly threatened by them. Let's see what comes of his fear. A reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 1, verse 8 through chapter 2, verse 10. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramses, for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, she shall live." But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and allowed the boys to live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all the people, "Every boy that is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it, placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside her. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." May these words be to us our light and our life. Thanks be to God. Oh, that was a long one. I think we need to retell it just so we know everything that happened. So let's start at the beginning. A A nation was built on enslaved labor. People whose land was stolen. People who were claimed as property brought to this nation against their will and enslaved and dehumanized. People to whom basic human rights were denied, who were denied access to education and public services. People who were criminalized and incarcerated. People who were denied a living wage, or in some cases a wage at all. People whose immigration status was weaponized against them. But Pharaoh did not know Joseph. That is to say, Pharaoh didn't know his history, or he was reading a different history book. He didn't want to acknowledge the debts his nation owed to those people, the terrible injustice of the ways his nation had always treated them, or the power of their resilience to thrive in the face of all of this. Pharaoh said, "These people are growing more powerful than us. They're stealing our jobs. They're evil and scary and dangerous. I will make life unbearable for them. I will take away their rights. I will make my nation think of these people as subhuman." Pharaoh created a culture of death where certain lives were worth caring about and others were not. A culture driven by fear of the Israelites who were different from the Egyptians. Pharaoh repeated and repeated the narrative that one person's success equals another person's failure. I wish it weren't so easy for this story to sound so terribly familiar. But then these midwives come into the picture. These midwives who are as strong and welcome a sight as sunflowers bursting forth in the desert. See, midwives are the ones who usher in new life. They make space for the pain and hard work it takes to bring a new creation into being. These midwives were courageous. They told Pharaoh no, they would not participate in this culture of death. No. And the Hebrew women were vigorous. Vigorous, they said, which translated from the Hebrew in another way means full of life. The midwives were courageous enough to proclaim life into this culture of death. They said no, and they said no again, and they ushered in this new life called Moses, pulled from the water. The beginning of a new hope for the Israelite people, full of life. It is a subversive thing indeed to be full of life, when the chaos around us is telling us only to be afraid. Think about Peggy the chicken. One day she's literally thrown, from her usual routine into the hustle and bustle of the city. So different from her quiet life at home. So much to be afraid of. The cars and the loud noises, people she's never seen before, polka-dotted underwear at the bargain sale. The chaos of not knowing where she is or how to find her way back home. But Peggy does a couple of really cool things. First, she embraces the newness with her whole heart. Even through her fear, she approaches the world with curiosity and wonder. And she looks for those small things that ground her and remind her that it's going to be okay. The comfy chair in the store window that reminds her of home. The pigeon she knows from her yard. The sunflowers. They give her the strength to keep going, and they point her in the right direction. Peggy is full of life. This week, an extraordinary thing happened. The moon passed directly in front of the sun, and people all over the country gathered to see it. Honestly, I expected it to be kind of an insidery meteorologist thing. I heard it was coming, but I didn't anticipate the way this event would enliven us and bring us together. From a beach on Lake Michigan, my family and I pointed our well-protected eyes toward the sun to watch this amazing sight. And as we took the glasses off so we could see to walk around the beach, for a mile in each direction, we saw groups of people doing the same thing, swapping glasses and cardboard box contraptions, sharing scientific tidbits about what was going on, marveling in the strange green light. I'm not sure if it was green here, but it was very green on Lake Michigan. I heard from so many of you about what you did during the eclipse. Going to Afton State Park for a feel-good afternoon of silly park games and eclipse spotting, road tripping with a car full of teenagers to witness totality in Missouri, sharing photos snapped through sunglasses and creatively tailored filters. Hardcore science geeks, people who believe deeply in the spirituality of the cosmos, toddlers, nonagenarians, and everyone in between came together on Monday in wonder and delight. For a couple of hours that afternoon, our eyes were pointed in the same direction. We were full of life. A distraction, perhaps. But these moments that we might be quick to dismiss as diversions from what's really going on in the world, maybe they're what's really going on in the world. Maybe these are the very evidence of God's transformative and redemptive work. Spending an entire summer in the books of Genesis and Exodus has been such a fascinating and powerful reminder that we have been here before in the midst of a culture of fear and death. We have dwelt in difficult places, and we will be there again. Think of all the chaos that we've gone through so far this summer as we've been reading these stories. So we talked about the feud between Cain and Abel, the rage and reconciliation of Noah's Ark, the trickery and rivalry between Jacob and Esau, the struggle and triumph of Joseph, not to mention the struggles of the women in these stories that we barely hear told. And yet, the Hebrew Bible is not a collection of stories about fear and death. It is a collection of stories about the deep and abiding promises of God. Every time it looks like death is going to have the last word, the power of hope and love transcends. God's love always prevails. And as we as Christians carry these stories with us into Jesus' story in the Gospels, we see the power of love. Stronger than force, stronger than hate, stronger than even death itself. We are an Easter people, living constantly in the promise that new life can break through. If we claim this Christian tradition as our own, we have to be full of life. God calls us to it. Throughout history, there have been so many midwives for the kind of new life that transforms the world. Of course, we can think of the big ones off the top of our head. Martin Luther King Jr., Bayard Rustin and Malcolm X, Oscar Romero, Mahatma Gandhi, we could go on. And it's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that we can't be midwives for transformation unless we're movers and shakers like the people we read about in textbooks and recognize as these prominent leaders. But I bet you've never heard of Casey Tinnan. Casey is a midwife for transformation in Northern California, where he hosts an LGBT-friendly youth group in a town where that kind of safe space is rare. They held a prom in the spring, and 30 high schoolers came, dressed the way they felt most fully themselves, dancing with whomever they wanted, living authentically without fear. It may not be a huge thing, but it's a powerful way Casey is bringing life into a place where it's deeply needed. You probably don't know Florence Timmerman. I think actually a few of you do. She lives here in North Minneapolis, and at 99, Florence lives independently and cares for her 103-year-old sister. When our junior hires came over to her house a couple weeks ago for a service project doing yard work around her home, they weren't sure what to expect. And the person they found was a retired high school teacher and former community activist who shared stories, who was genuinely curious about their lives, who was gentle and kind, and who, before they left, gathered them into a circle and prayed for them. Florence may not be able to do the kind of work she used to do. She can't stand up in front of a classroom anymore, but she is a midwife for transformation through the way she lives her life and treats other people. I don't claim to have any secrets about how to be one of these midwives. Most days I feel the chaos more strongly than the hope. I get lost in the complexity and the negativity of it all. But I have to believe that the sunflowers have something to do with it. Sunflowers, those things that ground us and give us strength to keep going, the things that point us in the right direction. We can look to the joy of sharing a meal and having a real conversation with a dining companion, a sunflower, a small one. Bearing witness to an upcoming marriage that reminds us that loving well is what it's all about. Thanks, Owen and Doug, for that sunflower. The peace of a meditation routine that's grounding and centering, a sunflower. The consolation and healing of prayer, a sunflower. We search for the sunflowers, those practices and people and uniting forces that remind us that we've been here before and will be here again, and God's not going anywhere. In fact, God is just waiting to welcome us home, full of life. Amen.